Tonight, we will tell you a story about women often misunderstood, whose true influence on ancient Greek society was far greater than history books often reveal. This is a story of the hetaerae, the elite courtesans of ancient Greece. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It truly helps us bring more calming narratives to you every week. All right, find a comfortable spot, let your mind relax, and allow the echoes of a distant past to wash over you. You will learn why these women stood apart in a society that often confined women to the shadows of the home. You will discover the rigorous education they received, teaching them the arts of music and dance, alongside the profound depths of philosophy and rhetoric. You will hear how they debated with the greatest minds of their era, how they amassed fortunes, and how some even shaped the political landscape of Athens. We will speak of Aspasia, whose intellect captivated Pericles himself, of Phryne, whose beauty became legendary, and of the witty Lais, whose sharp mind was as prized as her companionship. This is a story about independence, intellect, and influence in a world where such freedoms were rare for women. It is a story that challenges conventional views, inviting you to see these figures as pioneers of thought and freedom. Their role extended far beyond being mere objects of desire. Let us begin our journey into the vibrant and complex lives of the hetaerae. Tonight, we journey to a world of ancient marble, sun-drenched plazas, and whispers of philosophy under the Athenian sky. A world where women, for the most part, lived in quiet seclusion, their lives confined to the domestic sphere. Yet, within this seemingly rigid society, there existed a unique and often misunderstood class of women who defied convention, holding sway over the greatest minds and wealthiest citizens of their age. When you hear the word courtesan, perhaps an image of simple beauty and fleeting pleasure comes to mind. But the truth about the most celebrated women of ancient Greece, known as hetaerae, is far more complex, far more profound, and largely absent from the standard historical narratives. They were not merely women of beauty or providers of fleeting company. They were intellectual companions, esteemed conversationalists, and often powerful figures in their own right, shaping the very culture and thought of their time. This is a story that illuminates a hidden facet of ancient Greek society, a facet rarely explored in textbooks, yet one that profoundly influenced the lives of the men whose names echo through history. To truly understand the hetaerae, you must first grasp the stark reality for most women in classical Athens, the very city that championed democracy and philosophy, a city that paradoxically offered its female citizens very little personal freedom or public voice. Respectable Athenian women, those born free and destined for marriage, lived lives of extreme privacy. Their world was the oikos, the household, a realm defined by domestic duties and the rearing of legitimate children. From a young age, girls were prepared for their singular prescribed role: to manage the home, oversee the slaves, weave textiles, and bear heirs, thereby ensuring the continuation of the family line and the very fabric of the city-state. Their virtue was inextricably linked to their invisibility and their silence in the public sphere. They rarely left the house, except for highly formalized religious festivals, and even then, they were often veiled and accompanied, their presence a mere shadow. Their education was, at best, rudimentary, focusing on practical household management and perhaps basic literacy, certainly not on the philosophical, rhetorical, or artistic pursuits that defined the male intellectual elite. Engaging in public life, participating in political discourse, or even dining with men outside their immediate family circle was not only unthinkable, but also carried severe social penalties, often leading to public shame or even divorce. This enforced seclusion meant that even highly intelligent and capable women found their intellectual potential largely untapped, unvalued, and stifled within the confines of their homes. Their voices were simply not meant to be heard beyond the walls of their private domain. It was into this restrictive landscape that the hetaerae emerged as a stark, compelling contrast, a figure who navigated the societal constraints with an almost revolutionary independence. She existed outside the traditional family structure, yet she often held a position of influence and autonomy that no married woman could ever aspire to. Her role was not to be a wife or a mother in the conventional sense, though some did have children. It was to be a companion, a confidant, and, crucially, an intellectual equal to the most prominent men of Athens. This distinction is absolutely vital to grasping their true significance, separating them entirely from the common understanding of a prostitute. That simplistic and misleading label was reserved for the pornai, who were common streetwalkers or those who worked in brothels. The pornai offered their bodies for money without any expectation of intellectual engagement, social standing, or lasting connection. They were often slaves or foreign women, uneducated, and held no social prestige whatsoever. Their transactions were purely physical, and their company was cheap and easily acquired, a stark reflection of their low status in society. The hetaerae, however, occupied an entirely different stratum. They were not merely entertainers. They were sophisticated professionals whose services commanded not just money, but profound respect, admiration, and, most importantly, intellectual engagement. They were sought out by the elite of Athenian society not just for their physical allure, which was often legendary and celebrated in art and poetry, but primarily for their sharp wit, their profound knowledge across a wide range of subjects, and their exceptional ability to engage in sophisticated conversation on topics ranging from philosophy and politics to literature, music, and art. They were, in essence, the only women in Athenian society who could openly participate in the male-dominated intellectual and social gatherings, particularly the symposium, which was a formal drinking party where men gathered to discuss serious matters, debate ideas, and enjoy intellectual stimulation. Here, the hetaerae shone not as silent ornaments or passive listeners, but as active participants, often leading the discourse, offering insights, challenging perspectives, and even delivering impromptu speeches. This freedom, this unparalleled access to knowledge in public life, was their defining characteristic and what set them apart from all other women in ancient Greece. They were, in essence, independent professionals, carving out a unique and powerful space for themselves in a society that offered few, if any, other avenues for female autonomy or intellectual expression. Their homes often became veritable salons, gathering places for the most celebrated philosophers, artists, playwrights, and statesmen of the era, where groundbreaking ideas were born and rigorously debated, and where the hetaerae herself was often the central magnetic force, the very heart of the intellectual exchange. This was a secret, often unacknowledged aspect of Greek intellectual and social life, one that profoundly influenced the very men whose names we still remember today: Socrates, Pericles, Plato, and many others. The lives of the hetaerae reveal a hidden layer of ancient Greek society, challenging our preconceptions and inviting us to look beyond the simplistic narratives often presented. They force us to reconsider the role of women in a society that, on the surface, appeared to grant them so little. We will delve deeper into their extraordinary and comprehensive education, which went far beyond anything available to respectable wives. We will explore their surprising financial independence, their ability to own property, and the significant wealth many hetaerae accumulated through their unique profession. We will also uncover the captivating and often dramatic lives of specific, well-documented hetaerae, such as Aspasia, whose intellectual prowess and political acumen profoundly influenced Pericles, the leading statesman of Athens during its golden age, to the extent that she was virtually his intellectual partner. We will also explore the story of Phryne, whose legendary beauty inspired the greatest sculptors and painters of her time, and whose dramatic trial captivated Athens. You will discover how these women, often dismissed or marginalized by conventional history, were in fact architects of culture, muses of genius, and formidable intellects who navigated a complex and often perilous world with unparalleled grace, wit, and power. They were not merely present in the background of history, they were at the very heart of the intellectual and social fabric of their time, leaving an indelible, though often uncredited mark on the enduring legacy of ancient Greece. Their fascinating stories offer a valuable window into a forgotten form of female empowerment and agency, a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the enduring human desire for freedom, influence, and recognition in a world that sought to deny them. Their existence highlights the inherent contradictions of a society that prized intellectual debate yet confined its own women to silence, revealing a profound societal need that only the hetaerae were equipped to fill. You see, in ancient Athens, the world was rigidly divided, especially for women. A respectable Athenian woman, born into a citizen family, lived a life almost entirely confined to the private sphere, the oikos, which means the household or family unit. Her existence was meticulously structured, designed to uphold the social order and ensure the legitimacy of heirs. From the moment she was born, her path was predetermined, shaped by the expectations of a deeply patriarchal society. She was raised within the quiet, often shadowed walls of her family home, rarely venturing beyond its confines unless absolutely necessary, and then always under strict chaperonage. Her world was small, yet profoundly significant in its own way. Her education, unlike that of her male counterparts who attended schools and gymnasia, was not focused on philosophy, rhetoric, or public discourse. Instead, it centered entirely on domestic skills, spinning wool into thread, weaving intricate patterns on a loom, managing slaves, and overseeing the household's daily operations, from preparing meals to caring for children. These were considered the pinnacle of feminine virtues, preparing her for her ultimate and singular purpose, to be a good wife and a mother. She learned to manage the stores of grain and oil, to organize the household's finances, and to train the domestic staff, ensuring the smooth functioning of her husband's domain. The whirring of the spindle and the rhythmic clack of the loom were often the dominant sounds of her days, a testament to her diligent work within the home. Marriage was not a matter of personal choice or romantic love. Such concepts were rarely considered within the context of matrimony. It was, rather, a civic duty and a strategic alliance, an arrangement orchestrated by her Kyrios, her male guardian, be it her father, brother, or nearest male relative. Girls were typically married very young, often around the age of 14, sometimes even earlier, to men who were significantly older, sometimes by decades. This age disparity was common, reflecting the societal belief that women matured earlier for domestic responsibilities, while men needed more time to establish themselves in public life. The primary aim of this union was explicitly stated: to produce legitimate children, particularly sons, who would inherit property, continue the family line, and perform the necessary religious rites for their ancestors, thus preserving the male lineage and the stability of the Athenian state. Without sons, a family line could die out, and its property might be dispersed, threatening the very fabric of Athenian society. Once married, her new home became her entire world. She was expected to be modest, demure, and above all, secluded. The heart of her existence was the gynaeceum, the women's quarters within the house. This was often located on an upper floor or in a separate secluded part of the home, typically towards the back, away from the more public areas where male guests would be entertained. Here, in these often dimly lit rooms, she would spend her days overseeing her children's upbringing, managing the household staff, and engaging in her domestic tasks. Her interactions with men outside her immediate family, her husband, father, or brothers, were severely restricted. She would not attend public banquets, known as symposia, where men gathered to drink, discuss philosophy, and share poetry. She could not participate in political discussions in the assembly, nor engage in commerce in the bustling agora, the marketplace. Her public presence was virtually non-existent. Her reputation, her time or honor, and indeed the honor of her entire family, rested almost entirely upon her perceived chastity and her strict adherence to these social conventions. A woman seen too often in public, or speaking too freely with men not of her family, risked damaging her own standing and bringing profound dishonor upon her entire household. The societal pressure to conform was immense, enforced by the watchful eyes of neighbors and community members. Even when she left the house, perhaps to attend rare religious festivals or solemn funerals, she would do so veiled, her face obscured, and always accompanied by female slaves or older relatives, ensuring her modesty and protection. Her voice was seldom heard beyond the walls of her home, and her opinions, if expressed at all, were typically confined to domestic matters, rarely extending to the intellectual or political debates that defined Athenian male society. This rigid social structure ensured that the male citizens dominated the public sphere entirely, from the assembly to the law courts, from philosophical debates to military campaigns. The city, in essence, belonged to men, and the home belonged to women. This was the world into which all respectable Athenian women were born and lived. It was a life of quiet duty, of profound limitations, and of strict adherence to tradition. There was a certain stability in this structure, a clear understanding of one's place and purpose within the societal hierarchy. But there was also an undeniable lack of personal freedom, intellectual stimulation, and public recognition. For a woman to step outside these prescribed boundaries was almost unthinkable, and certainly fraught with peril to her reputation and the reputation of her kin. Any deviation could lead to social ostracism, accusations of impropriety, and a life of shame. This deeply entrenched system created a unique void in Athenian society. While men engaged in vibrant intellectual and political discourse in the public spaces, the stoa, the gymnasia, the symposia, their wives were largely absent from these conversations. They could not provide the intellectual companionship, the witty repartee, or the informed opinions on matters of philosophy, politics, or art that Athenian men so greatly valued. And it is precisely into this void that the hetaerae stepped. Their existence was so utterly remarkable, so profoundly different, because their lives stood in stark contrast to this traditional female experience, carving out a unique and, for many, an unprecedented path of independence and influence in a society that otherwise offered women very little of either. The hetaerae navigated a world where most women were shadows, by stepping into the light not through defiance, but through a different kind of engagement, one built on intellect and cultivated companionship, rather than strictly on domesticity or lineage. Their freedom was not merely physical, it was intellectual, social, and economic, allowing them to participate fully in aspects of Greek life that were utterly closed off to their respectable counterparts. This stark difference is key to understanding their true significance in ancient Greek society, a significance often overlooked in simple historical accounts. They were not just different. They represented an alternative, a challenge to the very fabric of female existence in Athens, offering a glimpse into what women could achieve when unburdened by the strictures of traditional expectations. Their emergence was a direct consequence of the societal void created by the seclusion of citizen women, a void that demanded a different kind of female presence in the intellectual and social life of the city. Without this crucial context, the hetaerae might simply appear as exotic figures of pleasure, but with it, their unique and vital role becomes clear. They were essential bridges between the private, domestic world of Athenian women and the public, intellectual world of Athenian men, filling a social and cultural niche that no other group of women could. Their story is not just about their individual lives, but about the very structure of Athenian society itself and the complex ways in which women found agency, power, and a significant voice within its often restrictive confines, creating a powerful legacy. This rigid social order, however, had its exceptions, and perhaps its most fascinating and enigmatic ones were a class of women known as hetaerae. The term hetaera itself is significant. It literally translates to companion, and this was not merely a polite euphemism. It was a precise definition of their multifaceted role in ancient Greek society, particularly in cities like Athens and Corinth. You see, while a vast majority of respectable women in the city-states were confined to the domestic sphere, largely unseen and unheard, Expected to manage the household and raise children, the hetaerae occupied and thrived in a distinctly different world entirely. They were the visible women, the ones who moved with a remarkable freedom through the vibrant public spaces of the polis, attending banquets known as symposia, engaging in sophisticated conversations, and sometimes even subtly influencing the very course of politics, art, and philosophy. Their existence was a paradox within the strictures of their age, a testament to a unique form of independence and agency that few other women could ever hope to claim. To truly understand the hetaerae, it is crucial to differentiate them sharply from another group of women who also operated outside the traditional domestic realm, the pornae. The pornae were common prostitutes. They were often slaves or impoverished foreign women, uneducated, and forced into a life of purely transactional sex work, often in state-regulated brothels, or soliciting on the streets and in the bustling market areas. Their interactions were brief, impersonal, and entirely devoid of any social, intellectual, or emotional connection. They were considered a necessary, albeit lowly, part of the city's underbelly, providing a basic physical service to men, but they held no social standing, no respect, and certainly no influence beyond the immediate transaction. Their lives were invariably harsh, often short, and almost universally defined by servitude, exploitation, and anonymity. Their names, if they were ever even recorded, have largely been lost to time, their individual stories remaining unwritten and unspoken. The hetaerae, by stark contrast, represented an entirely different stratum of society, a world apart in terms of their status, their autonomy, and their intellectual capabilities. They were, first and foremost, independent women. Many of them were indeed foreigners, hailing from regions such as Ionia or the Peloponnese, where women, by custom or law, often enjoyed more liberties and opportunities than their Athenian counterparts. Others might have been Athenian citizens who, for various personal reasons, perhaps having lost their family's protection or simply choosing a different path, opted for a life that extended far beyond the conventional confines of the oikos, the household. This independence meant they were not bound by the strict laws governing respectable Athenian wives and daughters. They possessed the ability to own property in their own names, to manage their own finances, to appear freely in public spaces without male escort, and, crucially, to choose their own companions, both social and intimate. This freedom was not merely economic or physical, it was intellectual and social, granting them an unparalleled degree of personal agency. They were not simply bought or sold like commodities. They actively chose their clients and their relationships, while often involving sexual intimacy, extended far beyond it, encompassing intellectual discourse, emotional connection, and sometimes even long-term partnership. Their unique position within society allowed them to cultivate their minds, their personalities, and their social graces in ways that were almost entirely inaccessible to the average Athenian wife. While a respectable woman's education was rigidly limited to the practical skills of household management, spinning wool, weaving textiles, and perhaps a very rudimentary form of literacy, a hetaera's education was remarkably broad, deep, and intellectually rigorous. You would find them diligently studying philosophy, engaging with abstract concepts and ethical dilemmas, learning to play musical instruments such as the lyre or the aulos with skilled proficiency, mastering the intricate art of dance, or honing their rhetorical and conversational skills. They were trained not just in polite conversation, but in the art of witty banter, in the ability to discuss complex philosophical and political ideas with leading thinkers, to recite epic poetry or lyrical verses from memory, and to charm and captivate with their intellect as much as with their physical beauty. This comprehensive and sophisticated training was not designed for a quiet, domestic existence. It was crafted for public life, for the salon, for the intellectual gatherings and convivial banquets where the great minds of Athens converged. The hetaera's central and defining role was to be a complete companion, a multifaceted individual capable of stimulating and intelligent conversation, offering intellectual challenge and insight, and providing a sophisticated form of entertainment that extended far beyond mere physical pleasure. They were highly sought after by the most prominent and influential men of the day: philosophers, powerful politicians, celebrated artists, esteemed playwrights, and wealthy merchants, not just for their allure and beauty, but primarily for their sharp minds, their cultivated wit, and their ability to engage on an equal intellectual footing. In a society where men often found genuine intellectual companionship and stimulating discourse conspicuously lacking in their own wives, who were largely kept secluded and uneducated, the hetaerae filled a crucial void. They served as confidants, as muses who inspired creativity, as intellectual partners, and sometimes even as trusted political advisors to the most powerful figures. Their elegant homes often became informal salons, vibrant gathering places where men could discuss ideas freely and openly without the usual constraints of public decorum or the watchful eyes of their families, and where the hetaera herself was frequently the intellectual and social centerpiece, guiding the conversation with grace and insight. This distinct blend of personal independence, extensive education, intellectual prowess, and unique social engagement is what truly defined the hetaera, setting her apart in a class of her own, making her a unique, often envied, and frequently misunderstood figure at the very heart of ancient Greek intellectual, artistic, and social life. Their individual stories, unlike those of the anonymous porni, have, remarkably, come down to us through the annals of history, sometimes through the admiring words of their famous male companions, sometimes through the detailed records of their considerable wealth and far-reaching influence, painting a vivid and compelling picture of women who, against all odds, carved out remarkable and impactful lives for themselves in a world that was certainly not designed for their freedom. This profound independence, which set the hetaerae apart from other women in ancient Greece, was not merely a matter of social choice or personal disposition. It was the direct result of an unparalleled education, a rigorous intellectual training that transformed them into the sophisticated companions sought after by the most prominent men of their age. Unlike the respectable Athenian wives, whose education was largely confined to household management, weaving, and perhaps rudimentary literacy to manage domestic accounts, or the common porni, who received no formal instruction at all and lived a far more precarious existence on the fringes of society, the hetaerae were immersed in a curriculum designed to cultivate their minds, sharpen their wit, and refine their cultural sensibilities to an extraordinary degree. This was an investment in their very essence, preparing them for a life lived not in the shadows of a household, but in the vibrant, often challenging intellectual light of public life, a world traditionally closed off to women. Their education was extensive, far surpassing anything available to the vast majority of women in that era, or indeed to many men. It began with the foundational elements of Greek learning, reading and writing, allowing them to access the rich literary heritage of their culture, and arithmetic for managing their often considerable personal finances. But swiftly, their instruction moved into far more complex and intellectually demanding disciplines, shaping them into figures capable of engaging with the most profound ideas of their time. Philosophy was a cornerstone of their studies, a pursuit almost entirely closed off to other women. Hetaerae were not simply taught to memorize the doctrines of great thinkers like Plato, whose dialogues often featured hetaerae as intelligent participants, or the logical structures of Aristotle's thought. Instead, they were trained to engage with these complex ideas, to debate them, to formulate their own arguments, and to participate in dialectical discussions that would challenge and stimulate their male companions. This meant understanding the various schools of thought, from the rigorous logic of the Stoics, who emphasized virtue and reason, to the pursuit of tranquil pleasure advocated by the Epicureans. They learned to articulate their tenets with clarity and precision, to identify fallacies, and to probe deeper into the questions of ethics, metaphysics, and the nature of the cosmos. Imagine the quiet intensity of such lessons, perhaps in a sunlit courtyard, the scent of olive trees carried on a gentle breeze, as a young woman grappled with the profound questions that shaped the very understanding of existence. They could converse eloquently on justice, beauty, and the ideal state, often surprising those who, initially, underestimated their intellectual depth. This philosophical grounding allowed them to transcend superficial conversation, offering a depth of companionship that few others could match. Music was another indispensable component of their training, understood not just as entertainment, but as an expression of the soul and a discipline in itself. They learned to play instruments such as the lyre, whose gentle strings could accompany poetry and song, and the aulos, a double reed instrument whose reedy, haunting tones were often associated with Dionysian revelry and intense emotion. Many were skilled singers, their voices trained to carry complex melodies and evoke powerful feelings, and some even composed their own songs or verses. Music was not just a pastime in ancient Greece. It was deeply intertwined with poetry, drama, and religious rituals, essential for setting the mood at a symposium or for entertaining guests with lyrical performances that could transport the listeners. A hetaera's ability to perform music beautifully, to discuss its theory and emotional impact, and to weave it seamlessly into the flow of an evening, was a mark of her cultivated taste and her capacity to elevate any gathering from the mundane to the sublime. The quiet strumming of a lyre or the clear resonant notes of a voice could transform the atmosphere, creating a space for deeper connection. Rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking and eloquent argument, was perhaps one of the most practical and powerful tools in their intellectual arsenal. In a society where public speaking was paramount, in the assembly, in the courts, and in philosophical discourse, hetaerae were taught to construct compelling arguments, to use language with precision and grace, and to engage in witty repartee that could disarm or impress. This training enabled them to hold their own in conversations with seasoned orators and politicians, to articulate their views effectively, and even, in some cases, to subtly influence the opinions of powerful men. They understood the nuances of persuasion, the power of a well-placed word, and the art of listening intently before responding thoughtfully, a skill often overlooked but crucial for true dialogue. These were not lessons in idle chatter, but in the serious business of intellectual engagement, preparing them to be more than just listeners, but active participants in the shaping of ideas. Beyond these core intellectual pursuits, hetaerae also received instruction in poetry, literature, and the dramatic arts. They would have been intimately familiar with the epic poems of Homer, recounting the tales of heroes and gods, the profound tragedies of playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, exploring the great moral dilemmas of humanity, and the biting comedies of Aristophanes, which satirized Athenian society and politics. This broad literary knowledge allowed them to quote classical texts, make insightful allusions that enriched conversation, and participate in discussions about morality, heroism, and the human condition as depicted in the great works of their culture. They were also taught the social graces and etiquette necessary to navigate the complex social landscape of the Greek elite, learning how to host a gathering with effortless charm, manage diverse personalities with tact, and create an atmosphere conducive to both intellectual exchange and pleasurable companionship. These lessons in deportment and charm ensured that their intellectual prowess was always accompanied by an engaging presence. This comprehensive education was not merely for show or for basic literacy. It was the very foundation of their unique profession and their elevated social standing. It allowed them to engage with the most brilliant minds of their time on an equal footing, to be seen not just as objects of desire, but as intellectual partners, trusted confidants, and inspiring muses. Their minds, cultivated and sharp, were their greatest asset, opening doors that remained firmly shut for nearly all other women in ancient Greece, who were largely confined to the domestic sphere and denied such opportunities for intellectual growth. It was this unique intellectual preparation that enabled them to transcend the conventional roles assigned to women, carving out a space for themselves as independent, influential figures in a society that otherwise offered women little voice or agency outside the home. The hetaerae were, in essence, the intellectual and cultural facilitators of ancient Greek society, embodying a rare blend of beauty, wit, and profound knowledge. Their presence at a symposium transformed it from a mere drinking party into a vibrant forum for philosophical debate, artistic appreciation, and genuine intellectual discourse, a place where ideas truly flourished and where the boundaries of thought were often pushed. They were the intellectual heartbeat of these gatherings, capable of guiding conversations, introducing new topics, and challenging established viewpoints, all while maintaining an aura of grace and charm. This was their enduring legacy, a testament to their cultivated minds and their pivotal, though often misunderstood, role in ancient Greek intellectual life. The careful cultivation of their minds, the mastery of diverse disciplines, and the development of their sharp wit were not merely for personal enrichment. They served a profound social purpose, preparing the hetaerae for their most vital role within ancient Greek society, their participation in the symposium. The symposium was a uniquely Greek institution, far more than a simple drinking party. It was a gathering of elite men, philosophers, politicians, poets, and wealthy citizens who would recline on couches in a private dining room, engaging in conversation, debate, and entertainment. The very word symposium translates to drinking together, and while wine flowed freely, it was typically mixed with water, a deliberate practice meant to encourage thoughtful discourse rather than mere intoxication. These gatherings were intellectual arenas, places where ideas were exchanged, philosophical arguments were honed, and political strategies were often subtly shaped. The air might be thick with the scent of roasted meats and fragrant oils, and the low murmur of voices, punctuated by the gentle strumming of a lyre or the soft notes of a flute, would create an atmosphere both convivial and intellectually stimulating. Into this exclusively male world, hetaerae were not just permitted, they were actively sought after and indeed indispensable. Unlike the respectable Athenian wives, who were expected to remain sequestered within the women's quarters of the home, their lives largely confined to domestic duties and the raising of children, hetaerae moved with freedom and confidence in the public sphere. They offered a form of female companionship that was entirely absent from the lives of most Athenian men, a companionship that extended far beyond the physical. Their presence transformed the symposium from a mere gathering of men into a more complete social experience. The hetaerae were the only women who could participate as equals in the intellectual and philosophical discussions that formed the very heart of the symposium. Their extensive education allowed them to follow complex arguments, to contribute insightful observations, and to challenge prevailing opinions with grace and intelligence. Imagine the scene: a respected philosopher, perhaps Socrates himself, presenting a nuanced argument about the nature of love or justice. A hetaera, perhaps Aspasia, would listen intently, her eyes reflecting deep comprehension. Then, with a subtle shift in her posture or a quiet clearing of her throat, she might interject with a perceptive question that revealed a deeper flaw in the logic or offered an entirely new perspective. Her intervention would not be dismissed. It would be engaged with, debated, and often it would steer the conversation in a richer, more profound direction. They were masters of rhetoric, able to articulate their thoughts with clarity and persuasion, and their wit was legendary. A well-placed jest, a clever retort, or a gracefully delivered poem could lighten the mood, or, conversely, bring a lagging discussion back to life. They understood the nuances of social interaction, knowing when to listen, when to speak, when to charm, and when to challenge. This made them invaluable facilitators of conversation, ensuring that the intellectual energy of the symposium remained vibrant and engaging. They could mediate subtle disputes between rival thinkers, gently guide a shy guest into the conversation, or add a layer of poetic beauty to a dry, philosophical debate. The presence of hetaerae at the symposium elevated the entire experience. They were not simply entertainers. though they often possessed skills in music and dance. They were intellectual sparring partners, muses for poets, and confidants for statesmen. Their ability to engage with the most profound ideas of their time, to discuss politics, ethics, and the very fabric of society, made them unique. They provided a crucial bridge between the private intellectual world of men and a more public, yet still exclusive sphere of shared knowledge and culture. For the men attending, the opportunity to converse freely and deeply with intelligent women was a privilege. In a society where formal education for women was rare and their social roles strictly circumscribed, the hetaerae offered a rare window into a different kind of female intellect and perspective. This intellectual exchange was not superficial. Texts from the period, particularly philosophical dialogues, often feature hetaerae or women of similar standing, playing pivotal roles in the development of complex ideas. While some accounts may be idealized, they reflect a recognition of the intellectual prowess these women possessed and the value placed upon their contributions. The reputation of a hetaera often rested as much on her intellectual prowess as on her physical beauty or charm. A hetaera known for her sharp mind and eloquent speech would be in high demand, commanding higher fees for her presence. Her ability to contribute meaningfully to a discussion on, for example, the nature of democracy or the intricacies of a new play was a highly prized skill. To be seen in conversation with such a woman conferred prestige upon the male guest, signaling his own intellectual standing and his appreciation for refined company. The symposium was therefore a critical stage for the hetaerae. It was where they showcased their unique talents, solidified their reputations, and built powerful networks. Through these nightly gatherings, they gained access to information, influence, and connections that were entirely unavailable to other women. They heard firsthand the political machinations, the philosophical breakthroughs, and the artistic critiques of the day. This privileged access to the inner workings of Athenian society gave them an unparalleled understanding of the world around them, further enhancing their value as companions and advisors. The atmosphere during a symposium could shift, moving from serious philosophical inquiry to lighter entertainment. Hetaerae would often lead these transitions, perhaps by playing a lyre and singing a beautiful ode, or by initiating a game of riddles. They understood the rhythm of the evening, knowing when to inject humor or a moment of reflection. The oil lamps would cast dancing shadows on the walls. The conversations would ebb and flow like a gentle tide, and the hetaerae, with their keen minds and graceful presence, would be at the very heart of it all. They were not merely present, they were essential. This constant engagement with the leading minds of the time refined their own intellects, keeping them at the forefront of Athenian thought. They learned to adapt their conversation to different individuals and different topics, demonstrating a remarkable versatility. This intellectual agility, coupled with their social graces, allowed them to navigate the complex social landscape of Athens with remarkable success. Their independence, a theme that will become even clearer, was profoundly rooted in this intellectual and social value. Their earnings, often substantial, were a direct reflection of the demand for their companionship and their exceptional skills. They were paid not just for their physical presence, but for their ability to stimulate, to entertain, and to engage the minds of the most powerful men in Greece. This unique position allowed them to accumulate significant wealth, to own property, and to live lives of autonomy that were unimaginable for most other women in their society. The symposium, therefore, was not merely a social event. It was the crucible in which their influence was forged, and their extraordinary lives were shaped. It was the place where their education truly came to life, transforming them into the extraordinary figures history has largely misunderstood. From the intellectual exchanges at the symposium, where their minds sparkled and their words held sway, the hetaerae often transitioned into a realm of profound financial independence, a status virtually unknown to most women in ancient Greece. These were not mere transactions. They were relationships, often long-lasting and deeply valued, that brought with them substantial material rewards. Unlike citizen women, whose property and finances were legally bound to a male guardian, a kyrios, who controlled their dowries, inheritances, and any earnings, hetaerae, particularly those who were foreign residents or metics, operated largely outside these restrictive legal frameworks. This afforded them a unique and powerful economic liberty. Their income streams were varied and often incredibly lucrative, far exceeding what a typical woman or even many men could hope to earn. While physical intimacy could be a component of their relationships, the core of their value lay in their unparalleled companionship, their ability to engage in sophisticated conversation, their sharp wit, and their cultivated charm. Wealthy patrons, captivated by their intellect and social grace, were not merely paying for a fleeting moment. They were investing in an ongoing presence that elevated their own social standing and intellectual life. Thus, the fees charged by the most renowned hetaerae were often exorbitant, reflecting the high demand for their unique blend of talents and the scarcity of such cultivated female company. Beyond direct payments, they received lavish gifts, precious jewels that glittered, fine garments woven from rare silks and dyed in vibrant, expensive hues like Tyrian purple, and even substantial sums of money presented not as payment, but as tokens of profound esteem and affection. These gifts were not simply trinkets. They were tangible expressions of power and status, accumulating into considerable fortunes that could secure futures for themselves and their descendants. A remarkable aspect of their independence was their ability to own and manage property, a right severely curtailed for citizen women who remained under male guardianship. Successful hetaerae frequently purchased houses, some grand and exquisitely furnished, in prime locations within bustling cities like Athens or Corinth. These homes were more than just residences. They became vibrant social hubs, hosting their own private symposia, where leading philosophers, artists, and politicians continued their intellectual discourse outside the formal, male-only gatherings. Within these opulent walls, shielded by the privacy of their own domains, the hetaerae were undisputed mistresses, able to conduct business, manage their households, and entertain on their own terms, free from the dictates of a male relative. They also owned slaves who provided service and further contributed to their economic standing, and some even invested in land or other ventures, demonstrating a shrewd business acumen that went beyond consumption. The cold stone walls of their houses, the rustle of fine fabrics within their wardrobes, the glow of oil lamps illuminating their private libraries, the clink of gold and silver in their private coffers, all spoke of a material prosperity that was a direct result of their unparalleled social and intellectual capital, a stark contrast to citizen wives. The most celebrated hetaerae amassed truly astonishing wealth, allowing them to live lives of extraordinary luxury and wield influence. Imagine them, draped in richly embroidered cloaks, their fingers adorned with rings set with precious stones, their hair meticulously styled, moving through the bustling marketplaces or attending public festivals. Their presence commanding attention. Their tables groaned under the weight of exotic foods, delicacies, and the finest wines, served in elegant pottery and metalware, reflecting a lifestyle of opulence. But their wealth was not solely for personal indulgence. Many hetaerae became significant patrons of the arts, commissioning stunning sculptures from craftsmen, vibrant frescoes for their homes, or exquisite pieces of jewelry from artisans, supporting the cultural scene. They understood that supporting artists not only enhanced their own reputation, but also contributed to the cultural vibrancy of their cities. Some even made substantial contributions to public works or religious festivals, subtly weaving themselves into the civic fabric and gaining a form of social recognition that transcended their unconventional status. These acts of patronage, typically the domain of wealthy male citizens, highlighted their unique position and their ability to wield influence far beyond the domestic sphere. Their financial might was an undeniable testament to the value placed upon their rare combination of intellect, charm, and social skill, setting them apart from every other class of woman in the ancient Greek world and reshaping societal norms. This economic independence was the very bedrock of their freedom. It allowed them to navigate a society that was otherwise profoundly patriarchal, granting them choices and autonomy that were simply denied to their more conventionally respectable counterparts. They could choose their companions, dictate the terms of their relationships, and live lives that were, by the standards of the time, remarkably self-determined. They were not dependent on a father, a husband, or a son for their now. Let us turn our attention to one of the most remarkable hetaerae, a woman whose name echoed through the ages, not merely for her beauty, but for the profound depth of her intellect and her extraordinary influence on the very heart of Athenian democracy, Aspasia of Miletus. She was not born in Athens, but rather in the prosperous Ionian city of Miletus, a place renowned for its philosophers and intellectual vibrancy. This background afforded her a broader education and a more liberal upbringing than was typical for Athenian women, even for hetaerae. Miletus was a hub of learning, where the exchange of ideas was as vital as trade, and Aspasia absorbed this atmosphere from her earliest days. She arrived in Athens sometime around the mid-5th century BCE, a period often referred to as the Golden Age of Athens, a time of unparalleled artistic, philosophical, and political flourishing. Her reputation as a woman of exceptional mind, not just charm, preceded her, drawing curiosity and admiration from the city's intellectual elite. It was in this vibrant, intellectually charged environment that Aspasia met Pericles, the preeminent statesman of Athens, a man whose leadership defined this era. Pericles was already a towering figure, respected for his eloquence, his strategic military prowess, and his unwavering dedication to Athenian democracy. Their connection was immediate and profound, rooted in a shared love for philosophy, rhetoric, and the pursuit of knowledge. It was not merely a physical attraction, though her beauty was acknowledged, but a meeting of two formidable minds. For Pericles, Aspasia was a revelation. She offered not just companionship, but intellectual partnership, a depth of conversation he could not find with any other woman, certainly not with his Athenian wife, who, like most respectable women, lived a life largely confined to the domestic sphere. Aspasia moved into Pericles' home, and though they could not be legally married under Athenian law due to her foreign birth, their relationship functioned as a deeply committed and public union. They had a son together, also named Pericles, who would later be legitimized through a special decree, a testament to the statesman's deep affection and respect for Aspasia. Aspasia's home quickly transformed into an intellectual salon, a unique space in Athens where men and women of intellect could gather and engage in spirited discourse. This was a radical departure from Athenian social norms. Here, the greatest minds of the age, including the philosopher Socrates, the playwright Sophocles and Euripides, the sculptor Phidias, and the philosopher Anaxagoras, gathered not just to socialize, but to debate, to learn, and to challenge conventional wisdom. Imagine, if you will, the soft glow of oil lamps illuminating parchment scrolls, the murmurs of intense conversation, the clink of wine cups, and the rich scent of olive oil and incense filling the air. Aspasia presided over these gatherings, not as a silent hostess, but as an active participant, a sharp-witted interlocutor who could hold her own against the most brilliant orators and philosophers. She was renowned for her mastery of rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, a skill highly valued in Athenian public life. It was said that men, including Pericles himself, came to her to refine their oratorical skills and to seek her counsel on matters of state. Her influence on Pericles was immense and widely acknowledged, though often with a degree of scandal and jealousy from his political opponents. Some historical accounts even suggest that Aspasia helped Pericles compose some of his most famous speeches, including the renowned funeral oration, a powerful testament to Athenian ideals delivered during the Peloponnesian War. While this claim is debated, it speaks volumes about the perception of her intellectual capabilities and her close collaboration with the statesman. She was more than a muse. She was a co-thinker, a strategic advisor, and a profound intellectual partner. Through her conversations and insights, she shaped his understanding of public policy, military strategy, and even the nuances of democratic governance. Her salon became a crucible for ideas that would ultimately influence the direction of Athens. Beyond Pericles, Aspasia also taught rhetoric to other aspiring politicians and philosophers, both men and women, further cementing her role as an intellectual force. She challenged the prevailing notion that women were incapable of rational thought or public discourse, demonstrating through her own life and work that female intellect was not only equal, but could be profoundly impactful. However, Aspasia's unconventional life and her powerful influence did not go unchallenged. She became a target for Pericles' political enemies, who could not directly attack the statesman himself without risking popular backlash. Instead, they attacked him through Aspasia, accusing her of various offenses, including impiety, a serious charge in ancient Athens, and even of being a procuress, running a house of ill repute. These were often thinly veiled attempts to undermine Pericles' authority and reputation by associating him with moral corruption. The accusations were likely baseless, designed to stir public sentiment against her and, by extension, against him. Aspasia was subjected to public trials, a terrifying ordeal where one's fate rested on the judgment of a large jury of Athenian citizens. It was a testament to Pericles' devotion and his own formidable rhetorical skills that he personally defended her in court, reportedly shedding tears to sway the jury in her favor. This dramatic public defense highlights not only the depth of his feelings for her, but also the significant threat these accusations posed to both their reputations and their lives. The trials, though ultimately unsuccessful in convicting Aspasia, revealed the deep-seated prejudices and anxieties within Athenian society regarding powerful, independent women, especially those who dared to step outside traditional gender roles and engage in public intellectual life. The golden age of Athens, and with it Aspasia's time with Pericles, came to a tragic end with the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War and the devastating plague that swept through the city. Pericles himself succumbed to the plague in 429 BCE, a monumental loss for Athens and a profound personal tragedy for Aspasia. His death left a void in her life and in the intellectual landscape of Athens. Yet, Aspasia demonstrated remarkable resilience. She did not retreat into obscurity or despair. After Pericles' death, she formed a new relationship with Lysicles, another prominent Athenian general and politician. She continued to advise him, and it is said that through her guidance, Lysicles, who was initially a sheep dealer, developed into a more capable and influential figure in Athenian politics. Her salon continued to be a place of intellectual exchange, though perhaps with a different tenor after Pericles' passing. Aspasia lived on for several more years, continuing to engage with the intellectual and political currents of her time, proving that her influence was not simply an extension of Pericles' power. It was an intrinsic force of her own. Aspasia's legacy is complex and enduring. She is remembered as Pericles' companion, and significantly, as a brilliant intellectual in her own right, a woman who defied the rigid social constraints placed upon Athenian women. She taught, she debated, she influenced, and she challenged the very foundations of her society's understanding of women's capabilities. Her existence shattered the prevailing stereotype of women as confined to the home, silent and uneducated. She proved that a woman could be a philosopher, a rhetorician, and a political advisor. Her life serves as a powerful testament to the intellectual potential that was often suppressed in ancient Greece. She contributed significantly to the intellectual ferment of the Golden Age, fostering discussions that shaped philosophy, politics, and art. While her detractors sought to diminish her through slander and accusations, her enduring presence in historical accounts, often in the company of the greatest thinkers of her time, stands as a clear indication of her unique and undeniable impact. She was a beacon of intellectual freedom and female agency in a world that largely denied both. Her story reminds us that even within societies with strict social hierarchies, extraordinary individuals can carve out spaces for influence and leave an indelible mark on history forcing their contemporaries and us to reconsider the boundaries of possibility. Aspasia's life was a testament to the power of the mind, regardless of gender or social standing. Among these remarkable women, whose lives unfolded with such unexpected freedom, was Phryne, a name that reverberates through history as a testament to the power of beauty and an independent spirit in ancient Greece. Her birth name was Mneserete, but she was widely known by her nickname Phryne, which meant toad, perhaps a jest about a youthful paleness, but one that soon became ironic given her legendary allure. She hailed from Thespiae, a city in Boeotia, and came to Athens, where her striking appearance quickly made her one of the most sought-after hetaerae of her time. Unlike many, Phryne did not rely solely on patronage. She commanded immense wealth through her own ventures and the gifts bestowed upon her by her many admirers. Her independence was so pronounced that she once offered to fund the rebuilding of the walls of Thebes, a city destroyed by Alexander the Great, on the audacious condition that an inscription be placed upon them stating, "Destroyed by Alexander, restored by Phryne, the hetaerae." This bold proposition, though ultimately declined, illustrates the scale of her fortune and her public confidence. Phryne's beauty was not merely a private affair. It became a public phenomenon, inspiring some of the greatest artists of her era. She served as the muse for Praxiteles, one of the most renowned sculptors of the 4th century BCE. It was her form that he immortalized in his groundbreaking work, the Aphrodite of Didos, often considered the first life-sized nude statue of a goddess in ancient Greek art. This sculpture was so revolutionary and captivating that many traveled great distances just to gaze upon it. Phryne also inspired Apelles, a celebrated painter, who depicted her as Aphrodite Anadyomene, the goddess rising from the sea, a masterpiece that captured her grace and ethereal quality. To be the subject of such prominent works elevated Phryne beyond a mere companion. She became a living icon, a symbol of divine beauty embodied in mortal flesh. She was known to display this beauty on certain public occasions, acts that were both shocking and a further testament to her unique status. During the grand festivals, such as the Eleusinian Mysteries, a sacred initiation ritual, and the Poseidonia, a festival honoring the sea god Poseidon, Phryne would walk into the sea naked, allowing her form to be seen by all. These acts, though controversial, were perceived by many not as scandalous, but as a public homage to the divine beauty she was believed to possess, a living embodiment of the goddesses she often portrayed. However, such a prominent and unconventional life inevitably attracted scrutiny and envy. Phryne's most famous encounter with public judgment came in the form of a dramatic trial. She was accused of asabeia, a serious charge of impiety or sacrilege against the gods, brought by an old lover, Euthias. The precise nature of the charge remains debated, but it likely stemmed from her unconventional lifestyle, her public displays of nudity, or perhaps her perceived disrespect for traditional religious norms. In ancient Athens, such an accusation could lead to severe penalties, even death. Phryne's defense was undertaken by Hyperides, one of the foremost orators of Athens, a man renowned for his persuasive rhetoric and sharp intellect. As the trial unfolded in the bustling Athenian courtroom, before a jury of hundreds of citizens, Hyperides meticulously presented his arguments, attempting to counter the accusations and highlight Phryne's virtues. He spoke of her generosity, her contributions to the arts, and her respect for the city. Yet, as the prosecution pressed its case, it seemed the tide of public opinion was turning against her. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension, the murmurs of the crowd reflecting the gravity of the situation. In a move that has become legendary, Hyperides realized that traditional arguments might not be enough to sway the conservative Athenian judges. As the final moments of his defense approached, he made a bold, desperate gamble. With a dramatic gesture, he tore open Phryne's robe, revealing her bare chest to the assembled judges. The courtroom, usually a place of strict decorum, was stunned into silence. Hyperides then appealed to the judges, not with logic or law, but with an appeal to their reverence for divine beauty itself. He argued that such perfection could not be impious. It must be a manifestation of the gods' favor, a living temple. To condemn Phryne, he contended, would be to condemn beauty itself, an affront to the gods who had bestowed it upon her. The sight of her unparalleled form, combined with Hyperides' fervent plea, had a profound effect. The judges, deeply influenced by the Greek appreciation for aesthetic perfection and the belief that divine favor was often expressed through physical beauty, were swayed. They acquitted Phryne, finding her innocent of the charge of impiety. Her beauty, in effect, became her shield, proving more potent than any legal argument or political maneuvering. This extraordinary acquittal solidified Phryne's legend, demonstrating the unique power and influence a hetaerae could wield in Athenian society, a power derived not from conventional status, but from personal charisma, intellect, and, in her case, transcendent beauty. Her story remains a captivating example of how these women navigated and even reshaped the social boundaries of their time, leaving an indelible mark on history. The story of the hetaerae, these remarkable women, is further illuminated by figures like Laius of Corinth and Laius of Hycera. You see, there were two distinct women, both named Laius, both exceptionally famous hetaerae, and their lives, though often conflated in later accounts, offer fascinating glimpses into the world they inhabited. First, let us speak of Laius of Corinth, considered by many to be the quintessential hetaerae of her age, flourishing in the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE. She was renowned not merely for her truly breathtaking beauty, which was said to inspire awe and even devotion, but for a sharp, incisive wit that cut through pretense and challenged the minds of the most celebrated men of Greece. Laius understood her value both in person and in intellect. Her companionship was not easily won, nor was it inexpensive. Indeed, her fees were legendary, reflecting her exalted status and the intellectual stimulation she provided. It was said that she demanded exorbitant sums for her time, a testament to her independence and her refusal to compromise her worth. She was known to reject advances from men who sought only fleeting pleasure, instead favoring those who could engage her in deep philosophical debate or witty repartee. Consider the anecdote involving the famed orator Demosthenes. He, a man of immense wealth and influence, is said to have approached Laius, offering her a significant sum for her company. Laius, observing him with a discerning eye, reputedly quoted a price that was a truly astronomical one, far beyond what even he, with all his riches, was willing to pay. When Demosthenes balked at the sum, she famously retorted that she did not sell her favors at such a low price to repent later. This was not about greed. It was about asserting her autonomy and demonstrating that her time and intellect were not commodities to be cheaply acquired. She was a woman who dictated her terms, a rare privilege in a society where women generally had little agency. Her relationships were partnerships of her choosing, not obligations. She entertained philosophers like Aristippus of Cyrene, who sought her out not just for physical intimacy, but for the profound conversations they shared, recognizing her as an intellectual equal, capable of challenging his own ideas. Her home in Corinth, a bustling port city, became a salon where ideas flowed as freely as wine and where her presence commanded great respect. Her independence was not just financial, it was intellectual and personal, a powerful assertion in a world that often sought to confine women. Then there was Laius of Hetaerae, sometimes called the Younger, to distinguish her from her Corinthian predecessor, though some historical sources merge their stories entirely. This Laius hailed from Hetaerae, a town in Sicily, and her early life was marked by tragedy. She was reportedly captured during a military campaign and brought to Corinth as a slave, a common fate for many in the ancient world. However, her extraordinary beauty was such that she quickly transcended her enslaved status, eventually gaining her freedom and establishing herself as a hetaerae of immense renown. Her beauty was so celebrated that artists of the time, including the sculptor Apelles, were said to have used her as a model for their depictions of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Imagine her, posing in the natural light of a studio, her form inspiring works that would endure for centuries. Her presence was captivating, her movements graceful. Like her namesake, Laius of Hetaerae was also known for her sharp intellect and her ability to hold her own in any conversation, distinguishing herself from mere prostitutes, the pornae, who offered only their bodies. She commanded a significant price for her companionship, not just for her physical allure, but for the lively discourse and stimulating presence she brought to any gathering. Her independence, hard won after her difficult beginnings, was fiercely protected. She made her own decisions, chose her own company, and lived on her own terms, an embodiment of the hetaerae's unique freedom. She attracted a clientele of the wealthy and powerful, men who appreciated her intelligence as much as her beauty. However, her fame and independence, while empowering, also invited envy and danger. Her life, unlike the Laius of Corinth, who is believed to have lived to an old age, ended tragically. She eventually moved to Thessaly, a region in northern Greece, where she reportedly fell in love with a local man. This relationship, or perhaps her continued success and allure, provoked the jealousy of the local women, who, unable to tolerate her presence, attacked her in a temple of Aphrodite, killing her with wooden stools. Her death, a violent end to a life of extraordinary freedom and influence, serves as a stark reminder that even the most celebrated hetaerae, for all their independence, still navigated a world fraught with patriarchal dangers and societal prejudices. Both Laius of Corinth and Laius of Hetaerae, despite their individual narratives, exemplify the core characteristics of the successful hetaerae. They were not simply women of pleasure, they were women of power, intellect, and agency. They used their wit, their education, and their charm to carve out a unique space for themselves in a society that offered few avenues for female self-determination. They were financially autonomous, choosing their clients, dictating their terms, and accumulating significant wealth. Their homes were not just places of entertainment, they were centers of intellectual exchange, where the most brilliant minds of the age gathered to discuss philosophy, politics, and art. The high price they commanded was not just for physical intimacy, but for the privilege of engaging with their minds, for sharing their company, and for the social cachet that came with being seen alongside such celebrated figures. They were independent entrepreneurs of their own lives, navigating complex social dynamics with shrewdness and grace. Their stories highlight the paradox of their existence, celebrated and desired, yet often scorned by conventional society. They were, in essence, the freest women in ancient Greece, living lives that defied the strictures placed upon their respectable female counterparts, pushing the boundaries of what was possible for a woman in their time. The grand narratives of Aspasia, Phryne, and the Laces of legend suggest a life of unceasing glamour and triumph. Yet, the daily realities of a hetaerae were far more complex, layered with challenges and shadowed by a quiet uncertainty. While they enjoyed freedom and education denied to most women in ancient Greece, their lives bore unique burdens. Imagine the constant pressure to maintain their intellectual edge. A hetaera's value lay not solely in beauty, though that was often a gateway, but in wit, knowledge, and ability to engage in sophisticated conversation. This demanded continuous study, an unwavering engagement with the latest philosophical debates, rhetoric, and artistic trends. Their minds, their most formidable assets, had to be sharpened daily, like a general's strategy or a sculptor's chisel. They were often expected to be fluent in music, playing the lyre or flute with grace, and to possess a deep understanding of poetry, able to recite Homer or compose verses. This was not passive education. It was a performance, a constant demonstration of cultivated intellect. Beyond mental exertion, there was the social tightrope they walked. While admired in the symposium, they were still viewed with suspicion by many in wider society. Respectable Athenian women, confined to their oikos, the household, often regarded hetaerae with a mixture of envy for their freedom and contempt for their perceived moral laxity. The hetaerae occupied a liminal space, celebrated in one context, yet potentially ostracized in another. Their independence, while empowering, also meant they lacked traditional protections of marriage and family. They were, in essence, self-made women in a world where a woman's status was almost exclusively defined by her male relatives. Their financial independence, while remarkable, carried its own anxieties. While some, like Phryne, amassed immense fortunes, others might have struggled. Their income depended on desirability, connections, and ability to cultivate influential patrons. A decline in beauty, a shift in political winds, or the loss of a key supporter could plunge them into precarious circumstances. They had to be astute businesswomen, managing households, investments, and relationships with shrewdness. The cold stone of their homes, often purchased with their own earnings, represented both their hard-won success and the ever-present need to secure their future. Aging was another profound challenge. In a society that highly valued youthful beauty, the passage of time presented a direct threat to the very essence of their livelihood and influence. While an older hetaerae might retain her intellectual gravitas and an established network of contacts, the initial allure that drew men to her might fade. This compelled many to plan for their later years, investing wisely, acquiring property, or establishing schools for younger hetaerae, passing on their knowledge and securing a continued income. Their lives were a testament to adaptability, to the constant need to innovate and reinvent themselves within the constraints of their world. The legal standing of hetaerae was also a deeply complex issue. They were not citizens, and thus lacked many of the rights and protections afforded to Athenian men. While they could own property and engage in business, they could not participate in the political process or truly defend themselves in court without the help of a male advocate. This vulnerability meant that even the most powerful hetaerae had to navigate the legal system with extreme caution, often relying on the goodwill and influence of their patrons. Their freedom was significant, but it was always conditional, always subject to the whims of the powerful men who governed their city. Despite these challenges, the enduring contribution of hetaerae to ancient Greek society is undeniable, though it has often been profoundly misunderstood and overlooked by later historians. They were far more than simply companions. They were cultural conduits, intellectual catalysts, and social innovators. They provided a space for public discourse that was otherwise inaccessible to women. In an age where married women were largely confined to domestic duties and rarely participated in intellectual conversations, hetaerae offered elite men the opportunity for genuine intellectual companionship. They were critical in shaping the minds of some of the most influential figures in Greek history. Think of Aspasia's influence on Pericles, or the philosophical discussions that took place in the homes of other hetaerae, where ideas were freely exchanged and debated, unhindered by the rigid social conventions of the citizen household. They fostered an environment where wit, eloquence, and knowledge were highly prized, pushing the boundaries of thought and expression. Furthermore, many hetaerae acted as patrons of the arts, commissioning works, supporting artists, and promoting new forms of cultural expression. Their homes were often vibrant centers of artistic and intellectual activity, far livelier and more open than the private residences of most Athenian families. They were trendsetters, influencing fashion, rhetoric, and even philosophical thought. They were, in essence, the cultural tastemakers of their era, facilitating the exchange of ideas that contributed directly to the flourishing of classical Greek civilization. Their very existence challenged the rigid gender roles of their time, even if indirectly. By demonstrating that women could be educated, financially independent, and influential in public life, they subtly undermined the prevailing notion that women's sole purpose was domesticity and procreation. They offered an alternative model of womanhood, one defined by intellect and autonomy, rather than solely by lineage or marital status. While they did not spark a feminist revolution, their lives served as powerful examples of female agency in a deeply patriarchal world. Ultimately, the story of the hetaerae is one of resilience, intellect, and profound adaptability. They navigated a complex social landscape, carving out a unique and influential niche for themselves. They were not simply women of pleasure. They were women of power, intellect, and considerable cultural impact. Their contributions were woven into the very fabric of ancient Greek society, often in ways that went unacknowledged or were deliberately obscured by later, more conservative interpretations of history. They were the unofficial educators, the social lubricators, and the intellectual muses who helped shape the golden age of Athens. Their true legacy lies not in the fleeting moments of companionship, but in the enduring echo of their voices in the great philosophical debates, the artistic creations, and the political decisions that defined an era. They remind us that history is often more nuanced than the simple narratives we inherit, and that the most fascinating stories are often found in the margins, waiting to be rediscovered.